Good evening, everyone. This is Evelyn Liebman with AARP New Jersey. Thank you for joining us tonight. As folks come into the webinar, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes before we get started. So thanks for your patience. Well, I think we will get started. It's a couple minutes after 6. As others join, they'll just come into the webinar. So again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Evelyn Liebman. I'm the AARP New Jersey Director of Advocacy. With me this evening is Crystal McDonald, our AARP New Jersey Associate State Director for Advocacy. Behind the curtain, we have our Communications Director, Rachel Auerbach, and our program person, Maria Guerra, who is helping us with this evening's presentation. So thanks so much again for joining us to talk about the value of New Jersey's 50-plus voters, an important topic, particularly in any election season, and New Jersey, as we know, has elections every year. So Maria, next slide, please. So tonight we're going to talk about who we are at AARP, who is AARP as an organization, the voting trends for 50-plus voters, profiles of family caregivers, another important voting bloc here in New Jersey and across the country, as well as the issues and priorities for AARP and New Jersey's older voters. After the presentation, we built in some time for some Q&A. And just so our audience knows, by way of housekeeping, we are going to be using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a tab for Q&A. And if you do have a question, please type your question into the Q&A box. And we hope to get to everybody's questions before the hour is over. So thanks, Maria. Next slide. So who is AARP? Many of you might know, but many of you might not know that AARP was started in 1958 by Ethel Percy Andrus, who was California's first female principal. As she got older and in her own retirement, she became concerned about the fact that many of her fellow teachers who were in retirement were retiring into abject poverty, literally retired teachers living in chicken coops because they didn't have access, remember, to pensions at the time. This was before Medicare and Medicaid, and didn't have access to health care. So she took it upon herself to figure out how to get retired teachers in California access to health insurance. And after she was successful in doing that, teachers from around the country who were retired wanted to know how they could participate. And then from there, it grew to other associations of other retired workers around the country. We are a membership organization. We have over 38 million members across the country, and 1.15 million members here in the Garden State. Interesting to note that 50% of all of our members nationwide are between the ages of 50 and 65, and then 50% are over the age of 65. Some other statistics that are important to know about older New Jerseyans is that we're home to 1.64 million Medicare beneficiaries, 1.65 million Social Security beneficiaries, and 24, almost 25% of our retirees on Social Security rely on Social Security for fully 90% of their income. And when you realize that the average Social Security benefit in New Jersey is just over $20,000 a year, it becomes starkly apparent of how difficult it is to manage New Jersey's high cost of living, and something we're going to talk about in a little bit. The 50 plus, or as we like to say at times, the 50 better, represent 36% of our labor force, and 65 and older represent 21% of our labor force. Many, as you know, are still working well into their 60s, 70s, sometimes 80s. So AARP, since our founding, works to help Americans 50 plus live life to the fullest. We advocate for our members on critical priorities, such as strengthening Social Security, protecting seniors' access to healthcare and their doctors, and ensuring all Americans have independence and choice as they age. We serve as a one-stop resource for information for the 50 plus population and offer programs and tools that help Americans age 50 plus make the best decisions about their health and financial security, as well as live life comfortably in their own homes and in their communities. As an advocacy organization, we focus on issues at the state and the federal level. And while we do advocacy around issues, we are a nonpartisan organization, something we'll talk about in a moment. Next slide, Maria. So with respect to our nonpartisanship status, we'll take a little quiz. Does AARP endorse candidates? That is false. AARP does not endorse candidates. We do endorse issues, however, issues that we'll also talk about tonight. Does AARP contribute money to candidates? That's also false. Do we work with coalitions? That is true. We don't work with partisan coalitions or electoral coalitions, but we certainly work in coalitions around issues, whether they be lowering the cost of prescription drugs, long-term care reform, Social Security and Medicare. We often work with coalitions and allies around those issues. Volunteers must not distribute candidates' material while wearing an AARP t-shirt. This is true. We are very careful not to even give the impression of endorsing a candidate, and so our volunteers do not wear any kind of AARP branded t-shirt or other kind of branding if they are distributing candidate materials. Can AARP give a gift to a legislator? That actually is true, although the gifts that we may provide generally are associated with the work that we may do in partnership with legislators, an award for a hard-fought victory, or something like that. But generally, any gift that we might give to a legislator does not have anything more than a nominal value. So it could be literally a pen or a pin or something like that. So we're not really too much into the gift giving business. Does AARP allow candidates to use its trademark? This is false. And we are particularly on the lookout during election season. Sometimes candidates in their campaigns may refer in their own materials to an issue that perhaps AARP has endorsed, but we are careful to make sure that no candidate uses AARP's branding and trademark in any kind of campaign material. AARP does not support activities for or against candidates. So this is true. Again, we are fiercely nonpartisan. We work across both sides of the aisle, at the state, at the federal, and in some cases at the local level. So we don't endorse candidates. We don't contribute money to candidates, but we don't have a PAC. But we work with elected officials all the time on the issues that are important to older adults. Next slide, please. We just want to talk a little bit about the economic contributions of New Jersey's 50-plus population. Several years ago, AARP began a project along with several academic institutions to actually measure the economic contribution of New Jersey's 50-plus. And we call that longevity economy. And the contributions that older residents make to our economy are very significant. Our 50-plus population creates outsized economic impact that will drive economic growth for the next 30 years. In 2018, the last data set that we used, we learned that the 50-plus population accounted for 37% of New Jersey's population, yet contributed 44%, or $263 billion of the state's total GDP. The 50-plus population's economic activities also supported 2.6 million jobs and generated $196 billion in wages and salaries. The 50-plus population's contribution to GDP is forecast to reach $805 billion in 2050. We're getting close to the 1 trillion mark, almost 46% of the state's projected GDP, when people 50 plus will account for 41% of our population. Next slide, please. I think, in 2018, the market activities of people 50 plus supported $26 billion in state and local taxes, 39% of the total New Jersey taxes collected. And that figure also is expected to rise, in fact, more than tripling to $90 billion by 2050. And the 50 population provides $21 billion in unpaid contributions. And what we're talking about when we describe unpaid contributions, we're talking about the economic value of the 50 plus volunteer activities. We know many older residents give of their time and their knowledge and volunteer with a whole variety of organizations, adding economic value as well in that way. And also, as we'll talk about, many of our 50 plus are also unpaid family caregivers who contribute mightily to our healthcare system, specifically our long-term care system. Next slide, please. It's also, I think, important to know as we think about the kinds of policies that are going to be important as we move forward over the decades, that our population is really changing. The 2020 census identified that 1 in 6 people in the United States were 65 and over. In 1920, this proportion was less than 1 in 20. So quite a change over the last 100 years or so. The US older population grew from 2010 to 2020 at the fastest rate since 1880 to 1890, so over 100 years ago. And this rapid growth was largely driven by aging baby boomers, those like me, born between 1946 and 1964, who began turning 65 in quite large numbers in 2011. Also of note is the population 95 years and over also experienced a large growth rate of 48.6%, increasing from 425,000 in 2010 to 631,000 in 2020. I think this is really quite amazing. The life expectancy for Americans in 1950 was 68. Today, the average 10-year-old has a 50% chance of living to 104. And why we want to talk about this 100-year life is because of the impact that this dramatically changing demographic will have on all aspects of our own personal lives, but also our society in general. We really have to rethink what is work going to look like. Living to 104 means that probably you're not going to retire at 65. And how is the workforce going to benefit from and accommodate that change? How does our housing infrastructure need to change? How does our transportation infrastructure need to change? How does our healthcare system need to change to adapt to this very dramatic change in the population? Next slide, please. So we'll now move a little bit into how older voters vote. And I think one of the most important things to know about how older voters vote is that they do vote. And older voters in many elections, both nationally and the state level, are and have and will continue to be the deciders in many elections. Next slide, please. This is some statistics that was put together by the Kaiser Family Foundation, looking at the number of voters as a share of the voter population by age. And these are the statistics that they put together for New Jersey for the 2022 or last year's midterm elections. And again, what the data shows is that 50 plus voters are the deciders. They certainly were in 2022. In the 2018 and the 2022 midterm elections, the share of voters 50% and older, was approximately 4 times that of voters under 30. And here you can see last year, the most important note to make was how the demographics by age impacted the elections. So those voters aged 65 and over, 66% of them went to the polls. Those 45 to 64, 58% of those went to the polls. This is contrasted to those younger voters, age 18 to 24, where 31% went to the polls, and age 25 to 34, only 29% went to the polls. So again, just to demonstrate that older voters do vote, and they vote in pretty large numbers. We also know that compared to other demographics, 85% of voters 50 plus say they are extremely motivated to vote in 2024, next year's big presidential election, compared to just 67% of younger voters. Next slide, please, Maria. So we also did some polling at AARP about older voters And what were the issues that swayed the 50+ vote? This again was based on the 2022 midterm elections last year. And not too surprisingly, 31% were swayed by issues around inflation and high prices, followed by 27% when it came to issues threatening democracy, and 22% of those 50+ voters were swayed by issues around abortion. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's another important voting bloc that represents the 50+ and their loved ones, both older loved ones and younger loved ones. And those are our unpaid family caregivers. Over 1 in 5 voters, more than 45 million across the country, are family caregivers. Over 1 million family caregivers are here in New Jersey. And 3/4 of voters are either current, past, or future family caregivers. I think pretty much everyone is going to be touched by family caregiving. I, for one, am a family caregiver for my stepmom, along with my siblings. And most family caregivers are older than voters overall. 64% of family caregivers are 50 and over, and disproportionately women, 50+, but otherwise similar demographically to the total electorate. It's also interesting to note that as a voting bloc, this is a group of voters that are politically contested, meaning that they are evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. Next slide, please. In polling research that AARP has done, we know that a large majority of voters express concerns about whether they will be able to get the care they need as they grow older. Black voters, women, Democrats, and Latinos are especially likely to see long-term care and support for caregivers as key issues in the voting booth. Proposals to help seniors stay in their homes and improve nursing homes are all electoral winners for candidates. And over 70% of voters say they would be more likely to support a candidate who backed proposals to support family caregivers, such as paid family leave, a tax credit, and more support and respite services. And what we have seen from the data and what our pollsters tell us is that regardless of one's political stripes, people adamantly want to age at home rather than a nursing home. And it's why support for helping caregivers is so politically important. Next slide, please. With respect to family caregivers, at AARP, we are calling on state and federal lawmakers to provide eligible family caregivers with financial relief to help cover some of their costs for caring for a family member. We'll talk about this in a little more detail here in New Jersey. At the national level, provide paid family leave so family caregivers can care for loved ones without losing their job or salary. New Jersey is really ahead of the curve on this one. We were the second state in the nation to enact a paid family leave program. Not to say it can't be improved, and something that we continue working to do so. Expanding access to family caregiver support and respite services to allow family caregivers to take a break is also important. This helps to prevent burnout and allow many caregivers to keep caring for their loved ones. Happy to say that this year in the 2024 budget includes expanded resources for respite care services for certain families here in New Jersey. And we are also, as part of the budget, developing at the state level through the Department of Human Services a new hub for family caregivers that will help family caregivers navigate the many services and programs that are spread across the state at the state and at the local level. And in general, expanding services to help seniors remain in their homes as they age. Next slide, please. Not a surprise, but another really important issue for New Jersey voters 50 plus is lowering property taxes. 78% of New Jersey voters age 50 and older place a very high priority on state policymakers lowering property taxes. Again, something that the state has been focused on over the last year or so. Nearly 2 in 5 have difficulty paying their property taxes each month. Not a surprise, given our highest in the nation property taxes, which average now over $9,000 annually. More than 1/3 of homeowners with household incomes less than $50,000 pay at least $9,000 annually in property taxes, which is a huge percent of their income. Leaving very little room for the other necessities of life, like utility bills, groceries, health insurance premiums, medications, and just to put gas in the car. 2 in 5 New Jersey voters age 50 plus have considered leaving the state to live elsewhere, and interesting too, in our latest polling, we determined that many residents between the ages of 50 and 64 are also thinking about leaving because of the high cost of living and high taxes in New Jersey. Next slide, Maria. So we're going to turn now to some of the advocacy priorities for our members and older residents in general here in New Jersey. Property tax relief, how best to support family caregivers, some of the important long-term care reform policies that can improve that system, and how to make our communities more livable in general, particularly as we think about the rapidly expanding number of older residents, not just in New Jersey, but that's what we're focused on. And we'll talk specifically about some ideas around housing. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Crystal McDonald, to go through these priorities. So Crystal, take it away.
Thanks, Ev, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. As Ev said, we're going to talk a bit about our advocacy priorities here at the state level. And given the extensive feedback that we have from our members and the polling of New Jersey voters, it's no surprise that these are our issues. So we're going to be starting with 2 slides on each topic, one that will cover just some basics about the issue, and a second very important slide on what elected leaders can do to help to alleviate some of the pain points for 50 and older New Jerseyans. So first up is property tax relief. As you can see, 4 in 10 voters age 50 and older report property taxes are difficult to pay each month. I know that this is an issue that you've long heard a lot about and one we are continuing to work to try to solve. 28% of homeowners report that their mortgage payment is 40% or more of their monthly income before taxes. 43% of renters report their rent payment is 40% or more of their monthly income before taxes. And 4 in 10 homeowners report that they are not familiar with New Jersey Homestead Benefit Program, and 6 in 10 are not familiar with the state senior freeze programs. These are incredibly important numbers as we think about how can we make sure that people can live and remain in their communities as long as possible, and where we know most people want to be. When we're out in community, we often find it surprising how many people aren't aware of some of the property tax programs already available to them. Next slide, Maria. So what can policymakers do about this? There have been some really monumental changes in the last couple of years in our state budgets to provide some additional property tax relief to seniors. We want to make sure that we fully fund these programs, including the Anchor program, Stay New Jersey, and Senior Freeze property tax relief programs. It's also very important to increase public education and outreach on our state's property tax relief programs to make sure that people are aware of these programs and can take advantage of them. And that we make sure to foster property taxes that are manageable for our older residents, especially those on fixed and low and moderate incomes. By addressing these key property tax issues, we will promote more housing stability and support our aging population. And we really can make a difference in people's lives to make New Jersey a better place to grow up and grow old. And that'll be a continuing theme throughout all of the work that we do here at AARP. Next slide. So I've touched on this quite a bit in thinking about how we better support our family caregivers. This is really a pillar of the work that we do at AARP because caregivers are really essential to our long-term services and support system here in our state. Here in New Jersey, we have about 1.1 million family caregivers who provide care that's valued at about $17.6 billion annually. And so this is really an important number to remember and to think about in the context of our state budget. New Jersey state budget is about, I think, a little over $20 billion a year for Medicaid. And so without the support of our family caregivers providing some of those long-term services and supports, it would really be an increased strain on our Medicaid budget, which provides much of the funding for long-term services. On the same hand, our family caregivers are spending 26% of their own income on caregiving activities and typically spend over $7,200 annually on out-of-pocket expenses to help care for their loved ones. And so, of course, many family members want to be able to help keep their loved one at home where they want to be. But this impact is having an increased strain on caregivers who, for example, 1 in 4 have taken on more debt, 2 in 10 have used up their own personal short-term savings, and 1 in 10 have been unable to afford basic expenses like food. And so as we're looking to help make New Jersey a more affordable place and a better place to grow up and grow old, we really have to figure out how we better support caregivers. We know that 90% of New Jersey voters 50 and older support a tax credit for unpaid family caregivers, including majorities of both Democrats and Republicans. And so if we go to the next slide and talk about legislation that helps us to do that. So AARP has been supporting very broadly bipartisan legislation, A1802S/2021, which would establish the Caregivers Assistance Act and create a state income tax credit for caregivers of elderly loved ones. This tax credit will provide a fully refundable gross income tax credit of up to $675. So it's a percentage of the expenses that a caregiver has used to provide care and help them to support a qualifying senior family member. The bill would take a major step forward in recognizing the value of our family caregivers and provide some meaningful financial relief to families to better support their caregiving responsibilities. Next slide, Maria. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't spend time talking about the need to really make some bold and transformative changes in our long-term care system. You've all been reading the same news that we have. And while we know that COVID has exacerbated longstanding issues in our nursing homes and in long-term care, we have to move forward to take steps to make sure that older adults have the ability to make a choice in the setting that they choose to receive their care, and that we make sure it's quality care being given. 87% of New Jersey voters 50 and older prefer to be cared for in their own home. I think that's no surprise to any of us. I think we all would prefer to be able to grow older in our own home. But what's more also important to note is that it's also more cost effective. The average cost for nursing home care per month in our state is about $12,000, where this care provided in a home and community-based setting is about $5,600. And so almost less than half. And so it really behooves us as a society, but as good fiscally responsible leaders, to make sure that we're investing more in home and community-based options. I think it's interesting to note that 75% of New Jersey's nursing homes are for-profit facilities, and these complex ownership structures may allow for money to be siphoned away from resident care. And if we come back to that Medicaid budget of over $20 billion, that's largely the payer as taxpayers who are footing the bill for long-term care services. And so it's really important for us to know where those dollars are going, and also to figure out how can we be really thoughtful about removing barriers to make sure that more people can access home and community-based services, which they want and which are much more affordable. Next slide. So AARP is supporting, and lawmakers can support two really major pieces of legislation. S3495 A4049 has actually passed through the Assembly, has one more vote to go in the Senate, and would provide for presumptive eligibility for home and community-based services. I know there's a lot of jargon sometimes when we talk about these issues, but the really kind of simple way to talk about this is that right now, if you're an older person and you find yourself needing care or a higher level of care, you can have what's called, you could be presumed eligible for services in a nursing home setting by filling out some basic paperwork about kind of your financial situation. And if you qualify, you would be able to start receiving services right away in a nursing home. And then your Medicaid application would be continued to be processed, which can take 45 to 90, sometimes longer days. Now, if you think about that 45 to 90 days plus timeframe that it takes for a Medicaid application to be approved, and think about a senior who needs care right away, and maybe they could receive care in a home and community-based setting, which would be more affordable, but where they don't currently allow for presumptive eligibility for those services. So if you can't pay out of pocket for those services yourself, you really have no alternative if you need a higher level of care, but to go into nursing home care where they can presume your eligibility and you can start receiving services right away. So this bill is really important to creating some equal ability to receive home and community-based services, and really could provide a lot of savings to our state in making sure that care is given in both the kind of most appropriate and preferred way for a patient, but also in the more affordable way. The second bill we wanted to talk about is A4484 S2769, which would revise the reporting requirements for nursing homes concerning financial disclosures and ownership structure. And this really gets to, back again, how are we being good stewards of our Medicaid taxpayer dollars? Right now, there really is not very much transparency in who owns a nursing home. Sometimes it's many, many people and set up in a structure so that you might not see on paper, and even the Department of Health won't know who all of the owners of that nursing home are. And those owners could also be providing services to a nursing home, for example, the laundry service, landscaping, even the entity that the nursing home rents the space from. And so they can charge outsized amounts for those services, and we wouldn't see that in the nursing home reporting that's currently required. And so this is really critical in helping us to understand where are Medicaid dollars going? Are they going into care? And how do we make sure that those funds are being spent appropriately? Next slide, please. And so now on to livable communities. We've talked quite a bit about the fact that our population is aging. We know 1 in 3 Americans is 50 or older. And actually, in the next 10 years, there are going to be more Americans over the age of 65 than there are school-aged children for the first time in our country's history. And so this really is going to have a major impact on our society. And we have to think about how are we prepared to allow older adults to be able to age in place so that we do have a state where we can grow up and grow older and have that choice. So on the next slide, talk a bit about how do we address some of the housing or lack of housing options that we have in our communities. We know that rising housing costs, insufficient supply of different housing options, and growing income inequality are likely to persist, if not worsen, in the coming years. And we need to address these needs so that we can have the ability for folks to age in places that are kind of appropriate and accessible. One of the policy ideas, I guess, that we've really been focusing in on are accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. And these can play a very important role in serving our housing needs. And you might think of them, as the mother-daughter housing. They can be guest houses, basement or attic apartments. And they used to be more common, but they are largely now prohibited under today's building codes. And so it's just one of the ways that we are trying to take a look at potential legislation or policy ideas to help expand, access to housing for our seniors in the state. Next page. So that kind of sums up our presentation for today. We really appreciate you all, hanging on with us and getting on to listen to the webinar this evening. And we're hoping that this is the first of many conversations, or maybe it's one of many conversations that we hope to continue. And we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, let me just echo Crystal's comments. Just want to thank everyone for taking some time out of your busy schedules today, especially this evening, to learn more about the value of our 50+ voters here in New Jersey and the issues that are important to them. If you don't have a question now, but you'd like to follow up with a question, you can write to us at njaarp@aarp.org. And happy to continue the conversation that way. We will be also posting this video on AARP's YouTube channel and making the slides available from tonight's presentation. So no questions. I guess Crystal and I did a pretty good job. Whoops, here comes one, two, hold on. Thank you. We got some nice comments in the chat, in the Q&A. Again, thank you all for attending. And can't repeat enough what Crystal said, that we are really looking forward to continuing these conversations and making New Jersey the best place, not just to grow up, but to grow old. We do have one question here. How do you suggest messaging in order to make seniors aware of programs such as the Senior Freeze? Great question. I think what we have discovered is that we have to use pretty much all the platforms that are available to us. I just saw a headline that I think the Department of Treasury in New Jersey is now going door to door in some neighborhoods to get out information about the Anchor program. We have been sending postcards to our members with information about the existing programs and where to find out more information. TV, radio, social media, flyers, like going door to door. Everyone gets their information in different ways. But I think what we learned from the poll that we did, kind of shocking that so many older voters didn't know anything about our property tax relief programs that I think the biggest word is more. We need to do more outreach, more education in as many ways as possible at the local level. Yes, we have a comment about how integral these programs are in order to be able to let our residents stay in their homes and in their communities where we know they want to be, and which is why it's such a big issue for 50 plus, who, as you learned, many of whom are relying on Social Security for most of their income, and simply can't afford to stay. And it's a shame because that's so many people want to stay in New Jersey, and the more ways we can make New Jersey more affordable, the more people will be able to stay. Question, is social media an effective way to reach seniors? I think the answer is yes. You know, I don't have all the statistics, but for example, many older residents are very active on Facebook, for example. And it certainly can be an effective tool. AARP has a Facebook page. We often post on social media to get information out to our members and older residents in general. You know, I will add that we also know that direct mail continues to be an effective way to reach older residents. But again, I think there's kind of no one way anymore. So we have to think creatively and use as many platforms as we can. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I'm happy to give everyone 10 minutes back to your evenings. We really do appreciate your joining us tonight, learning about the issues, learning about New Jersey's 50 plus voters, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. So thank you so much and good evening. So